may get disturbing, but it probably should be disturbing.
We can no more forget this than we can forget slavery, because it was just an atrocity to people, any people, especially these United States.
It was pretty rough, you know, that they was involved in some, just among the black, you know, anything like that around, and ain't nothing anybody black, it must be something wrong.
Myself and two of my brother had to go to the health department and get a blood test. And I had a little of syphilis in my bloodstream.
The Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the male Negro. What is the impact of this scientific experiment that was implemented 70 years ago? For the survivors and family members, coming to grips with what happened continues to be a painful and challenging journey.
Well, I was born in Mayor County in Alabama, which is Tuskegee. Just about maybe a mile, maybe out of town, you know, kind of south of the town.
George Key, born in 1907, was in the prime of his youth when he became a participant in what is now known as the Tuskegee Study. The program began in the 1920s to document the devastating impact of syphilis. Syphilis was a dreaded disease. Symptoms included severe skin rashes, fever, and pain. To find out more about how the disease affects the body, the Public Health Service initiated a program in Macon County, Alabama, a rural farming community with a high incidence of syphilis. 600 men were recruited for the study. 400 had syphilis. 200 used as a control did not. Nearly all were poor farmers or sharecroppers.
The first time we went, and another 3 or 4 went together. Just some kind of milk, something like milk to swallow. I don't know what that been so long, I don't even know what that was for.
When the study began, there was no cure for syphilis. Standard treatment consisted of mercury drugs and arsenic injections. Initially, the men in the study received treatments, but with the stock market crash, funds were no longer available and treatments were terminated. However, researchers continued to collect data on the men in the expectation that funding for treatment would become available within 6 months. Ultimately, the 6 months of non-treatment would continue for 40 years, and throughout that period, the men were never told the whole truth.
It was a program that said was helping the people, you know, on it, you know. If they joined that, they could, you know, get some results out of it. Some medical care, something like that. And then, I was real young then. I don't guess I might have been 20 years old then. I never could understand what it was all about. No more, she said it was a nice program, you know, like cover people when something come around and things go help. A lot of it jumped into it. But we were young, I didn't know what it was all about. So, me and my brother both joined in.
After we started going to the hospital, that's when we got involved with the white doctor. Well, they checked us. They checked me and told me what was wrong. But they did not tell me, so they told me, I had to have blood.
The men in the study received baseline blood workups, physical exams, and at one point, a spinal tap to determine neurological damage. They were told that the spinal tap was a necessary treatment. In truth, it was not only unnecessary, but also painful and dangerous.
Well, it was pretty bad, that spinal tap. Of course, I
did on pretty good with it, but and I stayed in the bed a week or two.
By the 1950s, penicillin had become widely accepted as an effective remedy for syphilis. Alabama law mandated penicillin treatment for those infected. However, doctors did not permit the Tuskegee participants to have the new medicine. In their zeal to continue to collect scientific data about the disease, public health physicians withheld treatment from the men. Aggressive efforts were made to discourage the men from joining the military, where inductees were routinely screened and treated for syphilis. Additionally, when some of the men moved away from Tuskegee, the Public Health Service made sure they would not receive treatment. The names of the men were circulated to clinics and health facilities in the cities where they moved, and doctors there were instructed to not administer penicillin. When George Key moved to California and later to Massachusetts, he found that doctors in both places kept track of him. And soon after relocating to Ohio, Ernest Hendon was contacted by a government doctor.
After I went to Cleveland, they still kept in contact with me. Sometimes one white man used to come up there and see me about once a year.
There seems to be some confusion. Let me explain what we're checking for. There is a germ that infects the genital area, resulting in a temporary and painless, but highly contagious penile ulceration. Now, this ulceration will disappear as the disease becomes non-contagious or latent. This latency can last for up to 30 years until finally the cardiovascular and nervous systems will disintegrate and collapse.
The HBO movie Miss Evers' Boys presented a fictitious version of the Tuskegee study. The nurse in the movie, Miss Evers, was patterned after the real Tuskegee nurse, Eunice Rivers.
By frolicking too much, or maybe passed on from your mom and your dad, you might get a really bad sore down below your private parts. Then do that sort of bug and crawl up inside here and go to sleep for 20, 30 years more, so it's not to hurt nobody but you. But when it wake up, you can't walk, you can't breathe, you can't think. That is bad blood. That's what we're checking to see if y'all got it so we can get rid of it.
One reason so many men agreed to participate in the study is because of Nurse Rivers. She lived in Macon County and was a trusted member of the community. The government enlisted her aid in recruiting participants for the study and encouraging them to stay involved. The Public Health Service also asked Tuskegee Institute to help coordinate the study. By using trusted individuals and institutions and by offering incentives such as free life insurance, the government was able to keep participants in the study year after year. In 1972, the secret of the Tuskegee experiment was uncovered. National news articles carried the story of the 40-year medical study that had so wrongly impacted hundreds of men and their families. Congressional hearings were held. There was a major public outcry, and a lawsuit was filed on behalf of the men. In an out-of-court settlement, the government agreed to pay $10 million and provide medical benefits to the survivors of the Tuskegee study and their descendants. One of those descendants recalls how he reacted when he first learned of the study that impacted him so personally. Not only was his father a participant, but also 2 uncles and several cousins.
Well, I was successfully employed and more or less moving up the ladder at work and everything, and it was like a bombshell, you know, to have this blow at that time, and then know that my father as well as my uncles were, you know, associated with it. And of course, I wondered how long that would be privy information, you know.
Herman Shaw, a longtime spokesperson for the survivors and a participant in the study, led a movement to gain compensation beyond money. Many survivors and family members felt strongly that what was needed was an official governmental apology, an acknowledgement of the devastation and deceit that defined the Tuskegee study.
The president came in, and the participants, the survivors, came in, touching them to be honored that day. I'll never forget it. Never.
trusting each other, caring for each other, and never allow the kind of tragedy which has happened to us in Tuskegee study to ever happen again.
Today, America does remember the hundreds of men used in research without their knowledge and consent. We remember them and their family members. Men who were poor and African American, without resources and with few alternatives. They believed they had found hope when they were offered free medical care by the United States Public Health Service. They were betrayed. What was done cannot be undone. But we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry.
So we were there and the president apologized.
Yes, that's the best thing. Because I was shaking his hand when I was going to shake his hand. I told him, I said, thank you for apologizing, for talking like you did. And I said, now we won't forget it. Yes, sir. So good.
To Fannie Mitchell, her husband Gary was much more than one of the 600 men in a medical study. When he died in 1966, she lost a man who was a loving husband to her and a generous father to her children. She remembers him fondly.
He was tall and slender, and he just was all right man, as far as I know, as far as I'm concerned, and hard-working. But he couldn't get one job, he'd get another, and he was a good provider, straight around to take care of the family, best he could. Drive trucks, tractors, anything he could get to make some money, he would do it. He was just a man that stood on his own 2 feet, I know that, and he wasn't scared. And when he was said his head to do, he would go and try to do that. And nobody could stop him. My father, named Reverend Stephen Charles Chattel, he was a nice, pleasant person. He would talk to anybody. He was a Baptist preacher, because we went to all churches, not only Baptist churches, people, and he and my mother stayed married until he passed in 57, May of 57.
For Rosetta Wilson, the Tuskegee study represents how something good can come out of bad. She suffers from a red blood disorder that requires costly hospital stays and medications. She says without her health care benefits, she would be at a loss.
I got card that stating that it would be my benefit to take me, go back and forth to the hospital. It would pay for my transportation back and forth to the hospital, pay the hospital bill, doctor bill. I go to the dentist, my eyeglasses. When I get in need of health, it would pay for the health, all my health benefits. Even someone taking care of me at home when I'm sick, night or day. I'm sorry that it happened, to everybody, including my father. But it's something good has come out of it. A lot good has come out of it. Because if I didn't have the benefit that I have now, I don't know what would happen to me. Like going back and forth to the doctor and the hospital. I don't know what would happen. I really don't know.
Many family members continue to cope with the knowledge that their loved ones suffered unnecessarily and died prematurely. For them, any compensation from the government could not make up for the loss of their loved ones.
It caused a lot of anger, the study did, and the participation that I did with the apology. because he drew attention to other family members that they did not desire. And even today, there are divisions within the family because of my ongoing participation, and I can't lay it aside. I remember my father saying, that we all have things that we're going to go through in life, much worse maybe than the experiment itself, and that we're going to have to learn how to face them. And then if there was something that was done against us, then we're going to have to be forgiving. Uncle Warren spoke a little, about the study itself, and he did not feel that he was dealt with justly, because he felt it's like he was cheated through trickery. And then he felt bad because for others to know that he was that ignorant to be a participant hurt him. Now, my Uncle Ephraim was not an educated person. He was surrounded by so many people that were a part of the study itself, to where he did not feel as tainted.
What are the lessons of the Tuskegee study? What is the legacy? For one, it has changed the way in which research is conducted. The National Research Act of 1974 mandates that individuals participating in research must give their informed consent. And there are now institutional review committees and bioethics centers to strengthen standards for research programs. The Tuskegee Human and Civil Rights Multicultural Center is developing a permanent memorial to participants of the study so that people will remember, so they will not forget. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has replaced the former Public Health Service with a new direction and understanding about the ethics of human experimentation. And yet, though many years have passed, there is much to do to restore confidence in the public health system. The ghost of the Tuskegee study continues to hover. Mistrust and suspicion are difficult to discard.
The only thing I told my children when I found out what was happening about those getting the blood tests and all that, don't get a blood test unless you just get one from the doctor. And don't let just anyone tell you to come and get tests and you get paid for your blood, which someone told my twins that was in high school. And I told them not to participate in it. So I don't know what was going to happen, but I was afraid that the same thing was going to happen to my daughters that happened to my mom.
When somebody comes around, we should try to know what's it all about. A lot of times they come and tell you it's a good thing, and you just fall for it, and then it's bad, but you don't know it till it's all in, So we didn't know. We were thinking it was a good thing going on.
What I wish that we would learn from this study as a people, as a child of one of the participants in this study, personally, is that education was never more important today as a result of this study than it would ever be. Today. Get education of some form so that you will not fall prey to something like this ever happening to you or yours.
What do you think? If you're gonna be in the health area, you need to be aware of this so-called study because you'll hear about it and about research and ethics and this is probably about the worst thing that's happened in the United States in terms of ethics and healthcare and research. And so Tuskegee, I've run from here to Tuskegee before. It's not that far. and so it's something to be aware of, right? You need to know about the study and how bad it was, and they deceived the poor farmers, and they thought that they were getting help, and they were just letting them suffer with syphilis till they died, and seeing how long they lived, and looking at some different kinds of things for that special group there. So it's pretty bad, right?
And I don't know all the details, but from this video, it sounds like it started off as something that was much less malicious or maybe even good.
Yeah, they didn't have a treatment for it. They were trying to figure out, what was happening to people that had it, and then it just went on and on. They got a treatment, and they could have treated every person in the study, but they just let it go. And so they just said, okay, let's just see what happens to these people. It's like, and then they spinal taps. Golly, that is painful. Ooh, stick a needle in your spine. Goodness gracious, and all the torture they did to those folks, and they thought they were getting help. They were deceived. They thought they trusted the doctors, they trusted the nurse, they trusted the people, and look what happened to them.
Yeah.
And
so like manipulated a whole community.
Manipulate them, yeah. And so the study was still going on when I was in college. I didn't know anything about it, but it was going on, and most of the folks were not educated, and they didn't know. And so at that time, not many people were educated. Okay, they had a few people in college, but not a lot, and so forth. So times have changed, and hopefully we've learned from mistakes of other people. And so we're writing the fiscal activity plan for the state of Alabama, and this will be the first plan ever. And 4 of us are writing the fiscal activity part, and it's about 100 pages long. But one thing is in the plan is inclusion. And so in terms of fiscal activity in Alabama, we want everybody to be included, right? No biases, no difference, and so forth. And so if you have a disability, or no matter who you are or what you are, what race you are, our plan is the first one ever to address that. And so there's other plans in other states, but they really haven't addressed accessibility in terms of we want people to have access to facilities and places to exercise and so forth. That's all in the plan, and a plan is a plan, and so hopefully it'll get carried out. And if you're in certain parts of the state, you don't have a lot of resources, and so this is a fairly rural state. It's a fairly poor state, and so there's not a lot of resources. So when I was listening to this and thinking, when you run, you get a lot of chance to think, because you're out there by yourself, and nobody can talk to you a lot of times. So you're thinking, and so. Tuskegee study is a bad mark on history, right? That was in Tuskegee, right? And then, what about Montgomery? Rosa Parks, all the issues there. One of my students and one of my good friends, Valda Montgomery, she was a neighbor of Martin Luther King. And she would tell me stories about Martin Luther King and so forth. So she lived right downtown, right within 2 houses of Martin Luther King when he was here. She worked at ASU. She worked with me for some, but she worked at ASU. She worked in the physical therapy program, and she just retired a couple years ago. And so her mother was having some issues, and she retired though. So we've got what? We've got Tuskegee and Montgomery, and then we've got Selma. Okay. Then we got Birmingham. Where they bombed the church and so forth. When I was one of my first coaching jobs was in Fairfield, Alabama, and it's a steel mill place. Okay, and so and all the racial stuff was going on at that particular time, and there were boycotts. There's all kind of stuff going on. So I was coaching football, and we had black and white players and so forth. One day, no black players showed up for practice, and we said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Well, they're having a march, and they won't let us come to practice." And then eventually, they never came back to practice, and so they wouldn't let them come to practice. Somebody wouldn't let them come because of the racial issues there. And so we'd have state troopers ride around our school, and there'd be marches and signs and all that kind of stuff there. One time I was in the Army Reserve in National Guard. We were called out to Tuskegee because there were some riots and some stuff going on there. So we were involved there some. So those times were pretty rough there. You know, you draw a triangle around this. So I was thinking about the Bermuda Triangle, and so now you have what? The discrimination triangle, right? And it all happened where? Right here, right? Tuskegee, Montgomery, Selma, Birmingham, and so you know, a lot of things happen other places, but here we've got a lot of press and a lot of recognition and so forth, and a lot of history, and so with Black history, some things to think about, right? So a lot of people have gone before us and suffered and so forth, so that we could hopefully do better, right? Okay. So yeah, and so when you look at when you prescribe exercise or whatever, some people may not trust you, right? And so because there's distrust in medical communities, there's distrust in people because the way they've been treated in the past. And so you have to think about that and know how to react with people and interact with people, and especially with promoting exercise or anytime you're messing with somebody's health or whatever, and so forth. I saw yesterday that if you're a black male and you have a heart attack, you have a 24% greater chance of dying than a white male. 24%. That's huge, right? And I think probably one of the major reasons is access to health care. A lot of people don't have access. A lot of poor people, they don't have insurance. The only time they go to the doctor is when it's so bad they have to go to the emergency room. And so that's not a good way to take care of people's health in emergency rooms there. So there's a lot of inequities and a lot of issues that need to be resolved, and hopefully things will change for the best, right? Dash, tell me what you think about it. Yeah, what do you think? You're a smart girl. What do you think? Way things work. Yeah. So yeah, it's tough, right? So those could have been somebody's father, grandfather, or mother. Wasn't when I was a young kid, I've been older. My mother and father had a store, it was a hardware store, and they worked all the time. Okay? So I was little, my brother, we were young, and we had a black lady that came to our house every day. Her name was Ruby Thomas. She was like a mother to us. Okay? And she took care of us, she cooked for us, she did everything for us, because my parents were working. And so, just me and my brother, she broke up a lot of fights, me and him. But, yeah, and so she's a great person. Great person. So I never will forget her. And so she lives in Lux Boca. She comes from Lux Boca to Auburn, and she's just part of our family. So that was in terms of my life, she played a big part in my life. Okay, so let's get into a little exercise science now. And so, but I think it's important for you to know about some of the history there in terms of the health and ethics and so forth. And so I think that's good. Don't get in the groups that you were in last time. Get with your group. Okay, get your case study out. And we're going to let one person from each group, we'll call on you to come up and answer these questions. Explain the answer to the question and how you made your decisions. Okay, so this group's first. Y'all will take number one. So who's going to represent your group? Yeah. Here, come on up. You can do it.
I could, sir, but I did not write them down. I underlined what we saw. So I have to just. Yes, please.
Okay. Kenzie, you can do it.
Writing it down.
Huh?
Writing it down.
No, talk to the class and tell them.
Should I wait?
Talk and write.
Oh, talk and write. Can I write first?
Yeah, you're in charge. You're in charge. Okay, the first, you read the case study about Patricia, and so, she's what, 56, and she's 5'6", 165 pounds, and she hadn't exercised and so forth. So you get a little history of Patricia. So reading that, what do y'all think about Patricia?
I think she's pretty healthy considering her age, and
Think she's pretty healthy? Okay.
I mean, compared to most people.
Compared to most people? Okay. So, Patricia, one thing, you can't look at somebody and tell how healthy they are. Yeah. And so, some of the numbers she has may be what? Surprising, right?
Yeah.
And
That's
so-
for sure. I was like, there's no way she's that in shape that she was compared to her.
Right. Right. Okay, so what risk factor? Well, she's writing the risk factors. Okay, and so we'll look at the risk factors. Now, what kind of risk factors are these?
One for cardiovascular disease, like risk for
Cardiovascular and metabolic, right? You know, it's all cardiovascular and metabolic. You're not screening for cancer. You're not screening for, osteoporosis. You're just screening for what? Cardiovascular and metabolic disease, right? And cardiovascular is the heart. Metabolic is pretty much the only thing on your metabolic is what? Diabetes, right? Now, the book talks about, why isn't there any screening for, in terms of exercise, with the lungs? We can do pulmonary function, you can blow into a tube and measure out volume and that kind of stuff, and we do that, but why don't they mention anything about the lungs in exercise?
Wouldn't it be pretty obvious, like the person would feel it if your lungs were that destroyed? Like you would need to be walking around with oxygen or huffing and puffing.
Yeah, and when we prescribe exercise, you can't hurt their lungs.
Yeah.
And so if they're having chest pain or whatever, you could probably hurt the heart, right? But if they've got COPD, I guess if they have an asthma, they could fall out or something like that. But normally the lungs are not affected, okay? And even us, just because you have the healthiest lungs don't mean you're going to be the fastest or the best or whatever, because our lungs are probably good enough for Olympic athlete quality, right? We have just normal good lungs, and so the lungs aren't a major issue there. You ready?
So let's just list the positive ones as well, then.
Okay, so tell us about them.
Okay, well, I wrote the negative ones, which is her age, because she's 1 year over the risk factors at 55.
Okay.
And then family history, her father died of a heart attack. She's inactive besides dancing, which isn't a lot of activity overall, but said she had not exercised in years.
Okay, but is her father died of a heart attack? Is that a risk factor?
Has to do with some kind of family history, but it would.
Well, what's the age category for family history of a male? Huh?
For males, before
I know, but in terms of family history. Okay, so he was older than 55, right? So is that a risk factor?
Oh,
Now, so that would well, that's not a risk factor because her dad lived long enough that we can't count that against her. Okay? Okay.
Her total overall cholesterol is too high. 200, I think, is the normal one, 225. Her waist circumference is 38 inches. That was too high. 35 over that is overweight or obese.
Okay.
Those are all the negative ones. And then she's positive for HDL.
Okay.
That wasn't counted as wrong for cigarette smoking for the past 6 months. Her blood pressure was in a good range.
Okay, so let's review these. Is age a risk factor
yes.
Yes.
for her?
Yes.
Okay, so that's one, right? What about family history?
No.
No.
Nope. What about smoking?
No.
No.
What about physical activity?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. What about obesity?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What about hypertension?
No.
Nope. What about dyslipidemia?
Yes.
Yep. What about diabetes?
No.
So how many risk factors does she have?
4.
And then you do
4.
what?
You subtract for the high HDL.
Then you subtract 1 for HDL, right? So in total, if the question was, how many did she have? She would have 3, right? Because she had 4, but her HDL was over 60, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if HDL is greater than 60, what do? You get to subtract 1, right? I'm not sure how they figured all that out, but you got a good HDL, you're protecting something, right? And so that's good. Now, when they do your cholesterol, unless they do what we call fractionization, unless they break it down into the different fractions of HDL, LDL, HDL, you probably won't know what it is unless they do that. One thing I would advise you, when you go to the doctor and you do a physical and they take your blood and do all this kind of stuff, get a copy of your results. And so get a copy of it so you'll have it, and then you should be able to look at it and read it. Now, all the liver enzymes and kidney enzymes, you may not understand those, but you'll understand the basic stuff, right? You'll understand like your hemoglobin, your red blood cells. You'll understand like cholesterol. You understand like triglycerides or fat. You should be able to read the basic, we call it a CBC, complete blood chemistry. You should be able to look at that, and then when you get the printout, it'll have little stars over ones that'll sort of like high or whatever. And so you can look at those, and then when you look at them, say, hey, let me look this up. You know, my iron level's low, or whatever. And then, because what doctors will do is they'll say, okay, let's see, for cholesterol. Okay, so for cholesterol is like 250, the doctor may say, your cholesterol's a little high, no big deal. But what do doctors see? They see high cholesterol all day long, every day, right? Mm-hmm. And it may not be a red flag to them, but it's something that you should look at. And then the next time you get your blood test, then you can compare and see if it's going up or down or whatever. And there's a certain amount of error in these tests. No test is what? Perfect. Wish it was, but none is perfect. There's an error associated with every test ever given, I guess. And so if we made a test, we've done studies with cholesterol, and we've taken blood from one person, we put it into 2 different test tubes, and we sent it to the lab. We got 2 different numbers on the same blood. Okay, and so they're running these test tubes through there really, really quickly, and they got machines, they got reagents, and so forth. So I've done a bunch of blood studies with different things, serum ferritin, and cholesterol, and iron, and so forth, related to exercise. And when we do the test, we'll have to have like standards, and so we know exactly that this is 200 milligrams per deciliter cholesterol. And so then we put our sample in, and if our machine reads 200, and it is 200, the machine's reading right? But if it's 200 and the machine reads 300, it's reading wrong, right? And so like a speedometer on a car, it may be not calibrated, it could be off, and so instead of going 60, you may be going 65 or something like that. So the same thing with the blood stuff. So there's error associated with all these tests. How much error can you deal with?
Well, it probably depends on the test, what percentage, right?
Yeah,
is acceptable.
Depends on what it is. If there's a possibility of the plane crashing,
you want that to
there's a
be
pilot error, you don't want to get on that plane, right?
Yeah.
If they're testing you for AIDS, you want to know. Don't tell me I got AIDS and I don't have it, right? And so you want to be what? You want to be pretty much accurate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, one thing that with this COVID stuff, there's all kind of errors. Okay. I think with the temperature thing, only 40% of the people even go in ventilators have temperatures when they come into hospital.
Right.
So there's people. My daughter, she tested negative twice, but she had the same symptoms and everything else that her 2 sons, son and her husband had that tested positive. So I think there's an error there someplace, right? So there's error. There's error in everything. What if you made out a test? Is there error in the test you make out? Probably, right? There's not a lot of things that are perfect. And so, you have to, the test I give, the questions I give, you may interpret a little bit different or whatever, and so I take that into consideration. I'm pointing to here or there, something's not right or not good or whatever, and so I'm not gonna penalize you, okay? And so, yeah, there's error in everything that we do. Carpentry, they tell you what, measure twice, cut once. So if you measure once and cut once, you may be in trouble, right? You measured wrong. And I've measured wrong plenty of times. So that's why now, if we run track and field, they don't accept records with a stopwatch. Too much error in the stopwatch. You go to Olympics, almost every event, a short event, is within 1,000th of a second from first and second place. 1,000th of a second. Okay. And so a stopwatch is not going to get it. And so if you and I were timing the same people, but all the old records in track and field at the state track meet were stopwatch stuff. So it may not be quite that good. So we know how many positive and negative risk factors she had, right? Okay, which ones put her at risk for cardiovascular and metabolic disease? You're gonna give it that. Okay, obesity, inactive. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So that's pretty much the risk factor. So when I test you in the future, you'll have some more risks. We'll have some more case studies that are a little more involved in this, but you should be able to, and you'll have your chart. In the past, we made you memorize these things, but I've gotten really weak in my old age, and you'll have something you can look at and look and see. So it's fairly easy, and don't interpret these things. It's like, oh, she dances, so I think she probably meets the exercise. It's all yes or no. Okay. Okay. Does she do 30 minutes 3 days a week or what? Okay. And so, and then if it's not given, if the information is not given, you count that as a risk factor. If we don't know her blood glucose, it counts. Okay. And so we don't know it, we have to count it because it could be either way. Based upon this, just based upon this. And then in case studies, they'll put a lot of other stuff in there, like, she has a pet, or she likes to, she likes flowers, or, they put stuff in there that really doesn't have nothing to do with the questions they're asking. It's just a description of that particular person there. Okay. What is her BMI? I'll let this group do that. Show us how you calculate that.
You want to get right up there?
Sure. So what is BMI? What is BIA? Huh? Some people get BIA and BMI mixed up. BMI is body mass what? BIA is what? Bioelectrical impedance analysis. Bioelectrical impedance analysis. And what do we use that for? Use it for body mass, right? Where we put the little electrodes on people, put the little current through them, and it measures their what? Body fat. Yeah. You do that in exercise fitness lab. common way to measure body fat, right? They put a little electrical current on you, and then you look at bioelectrical, that's the current. Impedance is the resistance to the current. If there's a lot of resistance to the current, that means you have more fat, right? And then analysis, BIA. So sometimes people say BMI, and some people say BIA, and so there's two different things. So as an exercise scientist, you should know the difference between the two. They both look at what? Body composition, right? Some form of body composition there. Okay, tell us what you did.
Well, we know she's 165 pounds and 66 inches. So using the conversion, she's 74 kilograms and 1.67 meters. So we did weight in kilograms divided by meters squared, and it was 26.5. And so we just rounded up to 27, which put her in the overweight category
Okay.
on the BMI chart.
So she's a little overweight, right? But that's what percent of the population out in Alabama is either obese or overweight?
Like 66.
Over about 2/3. About 2/3 of the population. So 2/3 of the population of Alabama has what? This risk factor. Is it really a risk factor?
At that percentage, no.
What's that?
At this percentage, no, but if it gets higher, it's a risk factor.
Yeah, here it's a risk factor, right? But remember what I say about error. How valid a measure is this? How accurate is it?
It's not super accurate.
Okay. And so the accuracy is, I'll tell you how accurate it is. If we measured everybody in the room, BIA and body fat would be, the average would be pretty good. Okay? In terms of accuracy of BMI. But it's going to overpredict some people, and it's also going to underpredict some people. Okay? It'll say some people are fatter than what they really are, and some people are not as fat. Okay? And so it mispredicts it both ways. So when we do stuff in exercise science, when we do means and all that kind of stuff, we're looking at the average. Okay? We're not looking at individuals in studies, we're looking at what? Average data. And so is everybody average? No. Does that make sense to you? And so you say, hey, I put these people on this weight training program and they improved 30%. Well, average improved 30%. Some people didn't improve. Some people improved a lot. Some people improved 100%. And so that's why whenever I review articles from all over the world and they report data, I say I want to see the individual data in terms of a graph with a little dot and how this person did compared to other people, because we want to know what? About individuals, because averages can be what? Misleading, right? So if the average income is $50,000, we have some people may make $1,000 and some people make $100,000, right? And we say income increased 20%. Well, you made $1,000, you increased 20%. Another guy made $50,000, he went up 20%. The average doesn't change, but there's a lot of difference in the individuals, right? So what I'm trying to tell you is be wary of mean data. Okay? It just tells you averages. You know, the average 5K for somebody's 35 minutes, right? You got some people that are running in 12 minutes, and some people that they have to wait till dark to finish. So there's a lot of differences there. Okay, let's go to the next one. VO2 max. What's our max bets?
10. 10
Yeah.
max. No.
You run 35 on what? 3.5 and 10 minutes. So what do you think about 10 minutes? Okay, that's a pretty good little workout, right? So 10 minutes is probably in the vigorous category.
Mhm.
Pretty good. Okay. So, what's our biggest level? Huh? Okay, based on VO2.
She's in the 60s.
Normal?
You'd probably even say good for that age. Average to good.
Get the chart out. Y'all all over the place. Get the chart out.
You used the chart from the book, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I put her in the good in the 60th percentile.
Okay.
I got a good memory for that. Hey, get your book out, page 80. Arnold, what do you think? Good job. Superior. Yeah, it's superior. Okay. So look on page 80 in your book. Page 80. Now tell me what you see. Just tell me what you look at on page 80. What is that? Okay. Okay, and these are called what?
No, I looked at men.
Huh?
Whenever I looked at it, I was looking at men. It like cuts off the top part of the chart.
Okay, so these are norms. Okay.
So what
Now listen,
percentile is she
norms.
actually in?
How do they get these norms?
Cause look,
Where do they get them?
it like, let me turn brightness up. It like won't let me go up.
On your
Yeah,
book.
my book still hasn't come in, so they gave me a code to like
Okay.
use this, but.
But yeah, in the book, you look at the book, and these are norms.
Mhm.
So how do they get norms?
Studying thousands of people.
Okay, so what they do, a lot of norms come from the Roman Center, Dallas, Texas. And what they've done is they've taken hundreds of thousands of people and tested them. Bring them into the lab, they put them on the treadmill, and they test them. And then, on the treadmill, they look at their VO2. And for this lady, they said, okay, based upon all the people we tested, a VO2 of 35 is superior. Because she's at probably the top 5 or 10% of all the people her age that they tested. Okay? And so, and there's lots of norms, and norms are just average people. Now, she's not a soccer player, right? And so, she's just an average woman walking down the street out here outside of our building, and she comes in for a VO2 max test, and then they get some numbers on her. And so we have, and these are health norms, we have norms for what? Men, we have norms for women, right? And it depends on what it is. Sometimes we have norms for different races, sometimes we have, I'll bring a book and show you from Australia where they've got norms for soccer players, they've got norms for the World Cup players, they've got norms for volleyball players, they got norms for runners, they got norms for weightlifters, they got norms for anything you can think of. They've developed norms there. And so, based upon norms, based upon the regular population of women her age, she's superior. Okay? And so, that means what? Does it mean she's going to win dollar 5K races?
No, not necessarily.
But, from a health standpoint, she's doing pretty good, right?
Yep.
Okay? And so, based upon looking at just her data, you know, she doesn't exercise, she might likes to dance a little bit, but she's probably fairly active, maybe, you know, we don't know. But, yeah, genetics plays a part, so if we had her, I'd say, hey, you got a good VO2, I think we can put you into the, you know, probably the moderate category anyway of exercise, get you out there and get some good, get you where you're really good, okay? And then you have people on the low end of the scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those are the ones that you really have to be careful with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their VO2s are low and so forth. Okay. What is their VO2 in liters? 60. I'm sorry, guys. What is the VO2 in liters? 165. Okay. That's the liters. And what can we know the liters, then we can calculate what? Calories, right? For every liter, 5 calories. Does she need physician clearance to start a walking program? Okay? No, she doesn't need a physician clearance, right? And so how do we know? Yeah, we go to a chart, look at the screening chart, and see, that's nice to have. We didn't have this a few years ago. We didn't have a nice chart and stuff like that. So remember, we've got the chart because we can't send every case study to the doctor to get screened before they go out and start an exercise program, right?
Mm-hmm.
They may come to you. You may do the screening, right? And, we can't do that. If you prescribe exercise for her, what net heart rate reserve levels would you recommend? Who wants that one? Dash, what's your group? What are they thinking? Okay, moderate. Could be what? Okay, could be light to moderate, right? Let's get her started. Okay. Based on risk factor profile, what type of exercise do you feel she needs to work on for her exercise program? Okay, so now that's your call here. So this is the exercise science person's call, right? And so I guess there's right or wrong, but it's pretty much what you decide, right? And so, looking at her numbers, what would you might want to change a little bit?
Her weight.
Weight a little bit? Okay, so maybe her body fat a little bit, so forth. And so you probably wouldn't want to put her on the all weightlifting stuff, right? So aerobic exercise, you talk with her and say, hey, what do you like to do? You like to dance? I see maybe some group exercise with women, or Zumba, or spinning, or something. So you can decide there. She exercises 30 minutes at a VO2 of 13 milliliters per kilogram per minute. 15. How many calories would she expend, and how many minutes would she be working at? So how many liters?
Was it like 1.12 liters?
1.125
Something like that.
liters. You multiply that times what?
5.
That gives you calories. Then you multiply that times what?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. So 30 minutes, she's going to burn how many calories? 168 calories, right? 168 calories. So just think, if she wanted to lose a pound of fat, she's going to have to do that a lot, right? 3,500 calories equals a pound of fat there. Okay, then we calculate that in minutes, right? Okay, provide a basic outline of frequency, intensity, duration, and type exercise to get her started. frequency, what would we recommend? Okay. Yeah, at least 3 days a week. It's, you know, this is your call again. Because, you know, the national guidelines are what? 5 days a week, right? Now, that's not exercise. That's what?
Physical activity.
Physical activity. And so, you know, we could, she had to exercise, she comes in, if you say 5 days a week, she's probably gonna do what?
Walk right back out and not do it.
She's probably, just not gonna do it. 5 days a week, I got stuff to do, I got family, I got friends, I don't wanna do that. So, you can say probably 3 to 5, and then, over time, you can do what?
Progress.
Yeah, get her started a little bit. Get her going a little bit. Intensity, we've already looked at the intensity, right? Intensity. Moderate, and we can calculate her heart rate reserve, right? Calculate her heart rate, exercise heart rate zones. Okay. Duration. Yeah, about 30 minutes. Normally, the average person you put them on an exercise program are not going to exercise over an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one reason all the like group exercise classes in the gym and so forth are usually an hour or less. Okay? Because after an hour, what happens?
Fatigue.
You get bored with it, right?
Nothing.
You gotta have enough. It's like those long bike rides. After 3 hours, I've had enough.
Yeah.
But you know these guys, they do these 100-mile rides every weekend, and it's like, I start after an hour or so, my back hurts, pedaling, it's like, oh, maybe off. But yeah, 30 minutes to an hour, and then build her up over time. Okay, so we've got a good start in developing what?
An exercise program.
Exercise prescription for the average, normal, non-heart disease risk factor. Okay, let's finish up chapter 3. Stay where you're at. One thing I want to highlight is on page 51. It talks about blood pressure. For years and years and years, hypertension has been considered to be greater than 140 over 90, right? That's been the guideline. Okay? But they've had some other research and some other work, okay? And look down that paragraph under blood pressure. 140 over 90 is the normal high blood pressure. But if blood pressure is less than 120 systolic and 80 diastolic, they consider pre-hypertension 120 to 139. So if your blood pressure is greater than 120, they consider that what? hypertension. Now, we go out and we measure people in Alabama and test all these people in Alabama with 1.5 million have high blood pressure with 120 over 80. What's that going to do when we go to 120 to 139? That means about everybody in Alabama's got high blood pressure, right? And so those are new guidelines because they want people to be aware that 140 over 90 is high blood pressure, but if it's greater than 120, it's pre-high blood pressure. Okay? And so that's a lot more people. And stage 1 hypertension is 140 to 159, or 90 to 99, and so forth. And so I want you to know that they changed the guidelines and they changed the numbers related to hypertension. There. Okay, that's pretty much it for chapter 3. Chapter 4 is a measure of cardiorespiratory fitness assessment test. We could take a whole year on this chapter. And so why do you think I say that? You really need to be in a lab where you got a treadmill, and you got VO2 max, and you got blood pressure instruments, and all that kind of stuff to really measure maximal oxygen up there. Okay? And so you need a lot of practice. In your exercise physiology lab, y'all do a maximal treadmill test?
Yes.
Okay, so you see that. Okay? Measurement evaluation, do y'all do any assessments of cardiovascular fitness in there?
Not yet.
Okay, and so you may do something there. And so in certain places you may get something there. And so here it talks about, whether physician supervision is required. And so it depends on what kind of test you do. It depends on the chart. It depends on the risk factors there. The health status of the participant. We always want to screen them, see how healthy they are before we test them. Maximal or submaximal. And some people we can max out, we measure their cardiovascular fitness, and some people we do a submaximal test. And then we predict their VO2 max from a submaximal test. Does that make sense? So we take them up to a certain level, and then we predict from there up to their maximal heart rate there. Okay? And then the length of the test. How long do you want the test to be? To measure cardiovascular fitness. Generally not more than, what do you think? 10 or 12 minutes. Okay. Not longer than 10 or 12 minutes there. Because if you keep them up there longer, it decreases the validity of the test. It should be able to max them out at 10 or 12 minutes. In terms of like a mile and a half run is the test, normally they should be able to run a mile and a half, 12, 15 minutes or something like that. Okay? And so that's a good test. That's a test they use for all the fire departments, police departments, a lot of military stuff. They all use a mile and a half test. Why don't they use a mile test?
It's not long enough.
It's not long enough. Some people sprint a mile now. A mile may be a sprint for people. It may not be a good measure of cardiovascular fitness because it's more anaerobic than it is aerobic there. You can run like a mile in 5.5 minutes. That's more anaerobic than aerobic. Okay? So we want to test maybe 10 or 12 minutes on you there. What about the Nike test y'all did? How long did y'all go? How long? 28 minutes? Okay, so that test is way too long.
Ours isn't enough. Ours is like 10 minutes.
Well, they have different ones. mention that test, because I've done research on it, and it's a popular test. So, in soccer, probably basketball, some other things, they do a shuttle test. And so you do the test for your fitness test class. It's called a pacer test. So, a guy named Legier from Canada did the test. Okay, and so it's a shuttle test. You run up and put your foot on the line and turn and go, because it's 20 meters. Now, what if you go past the line? Some coaches think you go past the line. That's more than 20 meters. That's not right. You should go where?
Too long.
Touch the line. Turn. Go back. Touch the line. Go back. Don't pass it. If you pass the line, you go more than 20 minutes. But see, they're not smart as I am. So you do that. And it does what? It speeds up, right? And you have stages. It speeds up and up and up and up and up. Okay. So they started out with a 20-meter shuttle test. Then there's a test in school, elementary school or high school or whatever, that they give. It's called a pacer test, right? So what they did, they took Legier's research for the shuttle run test, and there's a company called Stokely Van Camp that makes Campbell soup. So Campbell soup, they like to sell this soup to kids and stuff. So they sponsored the test. So they put their name on it. So they took Legier, the Lambert's test, Campbell soup, bought it, and now it's called the Pacer test. Now, if you went to school in Alabama and did the fitness test in the schools of Alabama, I developed that test. So you can blame me, okay? And so in Alabama, we had to come up with a test, and normally a lot of states use a fitnessgram test. The problem in Alabama is we can't measure height and weights of kids. It's against the State Board of Education rule to measure heights and weights of kids in the school. Okay? The reason is there's two ladies on the school board. I was the guy in Alabama that was the exercise science person that developed the test, presented to the school board to get it through. Okay? It had to be approved by the state school board, not the little local school board, the whole state. The governor's on the state school board. So it had to be approved there. So we take it there and we say, we want to do this fitnessgram variation of the fitnessgram test, but these two ladies on there, they say, well, are you going to measure height and weights of kids in schools? I said, yeah, we need to measure the height and weight to do some calculations about their fitness level. And they said, no, you can't do that. It says, okay, they'll bully the kids, they'll make fun of the kids if they're overweight and so forth. And so they would not let us do height and weights of kids in schools in Alabama. So we couldn't use the pacer test because we couldn't do height and weights of kids in Alabama. So we couldn't use it. Okay. And so we did some other test items, and then we couldn't use the fitnessgram, but we were using part of the fitnessgram. And then the company that sells the fitnessgram was going to sue us for using part of their test and not having our PE teachers buy the whole test. Okay? And so we couldn't buy the fitnessgram test and get every teacher a copy of it because we couldn't do the whole test, so we had to come up with our own test. And so Nancy Ray was in charge of the physical education in Alabama, and so I told Nancy, I said, tell them to sue us. Just tell them to sue us. They're going to look mighty stupid suing us over testing kids in Alabama in terms of their fitness levels. And so eventually, they just forgot it. They never did sue us. Okay, they threatened to sue us because we weren't buying the kids. And so it'd be like if you did the Spark Banksmo shuttle test and you made a variation of it and Nike didn't like it, they could sue you for not giving them credit or whatever for the test. version of the little table, whatever. They didn't like it, whatever. And so, because it wouldn't be copyrighted or whatever. So I went through that, and finally I had to compromise, because if I was going to get a test in and approved, I couldn't do height and weight, so I couldn't do the test we wanted, so we had to come up with a variation of the test. One major thing I did with the test in terms of, it has the fitness, right? It has the healthy zone and the not healthy zone, and like the superior zone. Y'all remember that? Whenever you're tested, it puts you into different categories. You're like, not so good, good, great, whatever. And so, for flexibility, I only had 2 zones. I had poor and good. So why do you think I only had two zones? Because the research with gymnasts and people that are hypermobile or hyper flexible shows what? They have a lot of back injuries and problems. So, would you want to give somebody that's hyper flexible, like a noodle, a good healthy score on flexibility? Probably not, right? Because they're too flexible. They need to. What's the average? What's the difference in what is flexibility? Range of motion, what? What's the opposite of flexibility? Stability. So you got stability versus what? Flexibility. So if you're too flexible, you're not what? Stable, right? And that can cause what?
Back
You
problems.
PT people.
Hip problems.
Could cause some back problems or some issues with too much flexibility. So we took out we only had 2 zones for that. Now the mile run and the pacer test, we had the 3 zones for that. The push-ups and sit-ups, we had 3 zones for that, and other kinds of things there. So it's not a perfect test. Okay, but it's about as good as we got. Okay, and so yeah, the pacer test, and then people have come up with variations of the pacer test, and so Bang's bow, Jens Bang's bow, and so forth. That's what he presented in Sweden and stuff like that. He came up with a yo-yo test, right? And they're trying to say what? The yo-yo is better than the 20-meter shuttle test or the beep test or whatever. And so then there's other tests, and so some of them there are little rest periods in between, and there's little variations in between, or whatever. And so to really measure cardiovascular fitness, it'd be good to get the person in and out within 12 minutes. Now, if you go 25 minutes, that means you're like, VO2 is what, 65 or 70 or something like that, okay? And so, for somebody like that, they're not normal, ideally, you would want to start them out what? Not at the very low level, you can start them out probably in the middle of the test someplace, and warm them up, let them go, so they're not out there for 20 minutes running back and forth on a test. But they make the test for the average person. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And so the average person isn't going to go for 20 minutes, right? So what's y'all's record? 96. How many? 96. See that 96? That is really highly aerobic capacity there. If we put you on the treadmill and did the thing, it'd probably be a VO2, 70 or 75 or something like that. So. Yeah. Stopped at 96? Yeah, just Who did? He got 95. Okay. So there were people from Ireland and Phed, huh? Okay. So, but yeah, that's instead of putting somebody on a treadmill, we can run them back and forth and measure how much work they do, and then we can predict how much oxygen they use and measure their VO2. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tests. What we're going to do this weekend, I want you to read that particular chapter 4. Okay. Then, on Monday, when you come in, I want each of you to come up with 3 questions you have on chapter 4. 3 questions. Everybody come in with 3 questions. Then, you're gonna give those 3 questions to Macbeth, my teaching assistant. She's gonna ask me the question. And then I'm gonna give you the answer. Okay? So don't make up something I don't know, right? So everything needs to be on how to do what? Huh? How to measure what? Cardiorespiratory fitness. Everything has to be related to what? Chapter 4, right? And so you'll ask a question. Now remember, Macbeth hasn't paid to take this class. She's doing it just for the love of the class, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna give her a title, teaching assistant in the exercise science department. You put that on your resume. I don't have any money to give you, but I'll give you a title. And so put that on your resume, and then you apply for jobs. See, I was a teaching assistant at AUM. And so I'm serious. Put that on there. So you help yourself. You give her the question, and then I'll do what?
Answer it.
Answer the question. Y'all like that kind of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
There's a show I listen to every Sunday night called Car Talk. Any of you listen to Car Talk on public radio? People have problems with a car and they call in, and these 2 mechanics give them answers to the how to fix their car and stuff. Pretty cool. Yeah. Chapter 3. Chapter 3. That's it. Hey, y'all have a good weekend. You get down a little early today.